This is Vesna Vulović, the woman who fell from the sky and survived. On January 26, 1972, she plummeted from higher than Mount Everest when her plane exploded in midair. This is the story of Flight 367's sole survivor and the longest freefall in human history. As always, viewer discretion is advised. In the early 1970s, Yugoslavia was a country teetering on the edge of political turmoil. The diverse federation, comprised of 6 republics and 2 autonomous provinces, was held together by the iron will of President Josip Broz Tito. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Croatian nationalists pushed for independence, sometimes resorting to violence. Meanwhile, for most of Yugoslavia, life went on as usual. It was against this backdrop that a young woman named Vesna Vulović pursued her dream of seeing the world. At 22 years old, Vesna had recently fulfilled her ambition of becoming a flight attendant for Yugoslav Airlines. Today's shift would be on Yugoslav Airlines Flight 367, which scheduled to depart from Stockholm, Sweden, make a stopover in Copenhagen, Denmark, and then continue its final destination of Belgrade, Yugoslavia. Ironically, Vesna wasn't even supposed to be on this flight. A mix-up had occurred. Another flight attendant, also named Vesna, was originally scheduled for the route. Unbeknownst to her, a terrorist plot would set in motion a chain of events that would make her name known around the world. But we'll get to that later. As the Jet Douglas DC-9 aircraft prepared for takeoff from Stockholm's Arlanda airport on the afternoon of January 26, 1972, there was nothing to suggest that this flight would be any different from the countless others crisscrossing European skies. At 1:30 p.m., the plane lifted off from the runway, its twin engines roaring to life as it climbed into the crisp winter sky. On board were 28 passengers and crew. Vesna went about her duties with a smile. She chatted with passengers, served drinks, and did her best to ensure everyone's comfort. Little did she know that in just a few short hours, she would be the only person on that plane still drawing breath. The first leg of the journey was uneventful. The plane touched down in Copenhagen for its scheduled stopover. Some passengers disembarked, while others boarded. It was during this layover that something sinister may have been introduced to the aircraft. Later investigations would focus intensely on this stop, but in the moment, no one noticed anything amiss. At 3:15 p.m., Flight 367 took off once again, this time bound for Belgrade. The plane climbed to its cruising altitude of 33,330 feet, soaring high above the clouds. Inside the pressurized cabin, passengers settled in for the final leg of their journey. Some read books or magazines, others chatted with their seatmates, and a few dozed off, lulled by the monotonous drone of the engines. Vesna moved down the narrow aisle, the wheels of her food cart squeaking slightly as she pushed it. As the plane entered Czechoslovak airspace, Captain Ratko Mihik and co-pilot Slobodan Sehovic were calmly guiding the aircraft through the cold January sky. At precisely 4:01 p.m., everything changed in an instant. A deafening boom ripped through the aircraft, so loud it felt like a physical blow. In a fraction of a second, the air pressure plummeted. Passengers' ears popped painfully as the cabin depressurized. The sudden rush of air was like a tornado, whipping loose items into a frenzy. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, swaying violently in the turbulent air. The plane split apart, breaking into 3 main sections. The cockpit, severed from the rest of the aircraft, plummeted towards Earth with Captain Mihik and co-pilot Sehovic still trapped in their seats. The main fuselage containing most of the passengers rapidly disintegrated with the explosion and depressurization, killing several people instantly. Those who survived the initial explosion were quickly pulled out of the disintegrating fuselage, plummeting to their deaths in the freezing air. Vesna, who had been in the rear of the aircraft serving passengers, found herself still in the small section of the tail. As this piece of plane fell, she was pinned by the food cart, which was inadvertently securing her to the fuselage section. As Vesna plummeted through the freezing air, the temperature plunged to a bone-chilling negative 45 degrees Celsius. The moisture on her skin crystallized instantly, and the thin air provided barely any oxygen. Far below, the ground was a distant patchwork of whites, greens, and browns, growing larger with terrifying speed. Vesna, mercifully unconscious, was unaware of the nightmare unfolding around her. Meanwhile, in the Czech village of Srpska Kamenica, locals were going about their daily routines. It was a cold winter's day and most people were hurrying about their business, eager to get back to the warmth of their homes. They had heard the explosion, and what they saw defied belief. Debris was raining from the sky, pieces of metal, luggage, and to their horror, human bodies. It was a scene of unimaginable tragedy unfolding before their eyes. Among the falling wreckage, they spotted a large piece of the aircraft, tumbling end over end as it fell. Unknown to the villagers, this was the tail section containing Vesna. The tail section crashed through the bare branches of trees on a heavily forested slope. Each impact broke off pieces of the fuselage, slowing its descent. The trees, stripped of their leaves by the harsh winter, acted like a natural brake system. Finally, after a few minutes, the tail section slammed into the snow-covered ground. The deep snow, along with the gradual deceleration caused by the trees, helped to cushion the final impact. The villagers of Srpska Kamenice, overcoming their initial shock, quickly organized themselves. Some rushed to call for help, while others grabbed whatever tools they could find and headed towards the crash site. When the first rescuers reached the scene, they were confronted with devastating carnage. Debris was scattered across a wide area, with personal belongings mingled with aircraft parts and human remains. The snow, pristine white just moments ago, was now stained with blood and jet fuel. As they searched the wreckage, expecting to find only bodies, one of the rescuers heard something that seemed impossible, a weak moan coming from the mangled tail section. Hardly daring to hope, they rushed to investigate. As they cleared away debris, they were stunned to find a young woman, battered and broken, but incredibly, still alive. Vesna's injuries were catastrophic. Her skull was fractured, both legs were broken, 3 vertebrae were crushed, her pelvis was fractured, several ribs were broken, and she was paralyzed from the waist down. She was bleeding profusely, and her body was in shock from the extreme cold and trauma. Every second counted. The rescuers extricated Vesna from the wreckage and rushed her to the nearest hospital. As the ambulance sped through the snowy streets, its siren wailing, the medics fought to keep their miracle patient alive. At the hospital, doctors were understandably pessimistic about Vesna's chances of survival. Her injuries were so severe that many thought it would be kinder to let her pass away peacefully, but they did everything in their power to save her. For days, Vesna hovered between life and death. She underwent multiple surgeries as doctors worked tirelessly to repair her broken body. The medical team dealt with one crisis after another: internal bleeding, the risks of infection, the danger of organ failure. For 27 days, Vesna remained in a coma, her life hanging by a thread. The world outside held its breath as news of the sole survivor of Flight 367 spread across the globe. Then, against all odds, Vesna opened her eyes. When she finally awoke in a Belgrade hospital, she had no memory of the crash or the fall. In a moment that would later become famous, her first words upon regaining consciousness were, "Mother, is my uniform pressed for work?" As Vesna slowly regained awareness, she was confronted with the horrifying reality of what had happened. She learned that she was the sole survivor of the crash. All 27 other passengers and crew members, including the pilot and co-pilot, had perished. The weight of this knowledge would haunt Vesna for the rest of her life. She grappled with survivor's guilt, constantly questioning why she had been spared when so many others had died. The months that followed were grueling. Vesna underwent multiple surgeries and spent nearly a year in the hospital. Her recovery was painful and slow, testing the limits of her physical and mental endurance. But Vesna's determination proved to be as extraordinary as her survival. After countless hours of agonizing physical therapy, she defied medical expectations once again. Supported by parallel bars, she took her first tentative steps, a moment of triumph celebrated by her medical team and family. However, even as her body healed, Vesna grappled with the psychological impact of her experience. She suffered from severe headaches, episodes of temporary paralysis, and debilitating post-traumatic stress disorder. Nightmares plagued her sleep, often waking her with terrifying visions of falling. As news of Vesna's miraculous survival spread, the scientific community was baffled. How could anyone survive a fall from such an extreme height? Investigators and medical experts grappled with this question, seeking to understand the unique combination of factors that had allowed Vesna to live while all others perished. Several elements had aligned in Vesna's favor. Her location in the rear of the plane had provided some initial protection from the blast. The food cart, which had seemed like a threat at first, had actually pinned her to a section of the fuselage, preventing her from being immediately sucked out into the thin, freezing air. Vesna had lost consciousness almost immediately due to the rapid depressurization. This state of unconsciousness was crucial, as it prevented her from tensing her body during the fall. Had she been awake and rigid with fear, the impact would almost certainly have been fatal. Doctors theorized that Vesna's naturally low blood pressure had caused her to pass out quickly, reducing strain on her vital organs during the plummet. This may have prevented her heart from bursting under the extreme stress of the fall. The extreme cold at high altitude may have triggered a type of hibernation state, slowing her metabolism and reducing internal bleeding. In essence, the very conditions that threatened Vesna's life may have contributed to saving it. Finally, the way she had landed. In the tail section, on a heavily wooded, snow-covered slope, had broken her fall and cushioned the impact. The angle of the slope had distributed the force of impact, further reducing the severity of her injuries. As Vesna fought her way back to health, investigators turned their attention to the cause of the explosion. The stakes were high. If this was indeed a terrorist attack, it could have significant political repercussions. Initial reports suggested a bomb that had been placed in the front baggage compartment. This theory gained traction when a Croatian nationalist group called Ustasi quickly claimed responsibility for the bombing. The group alleged that one of their members had placed a bomb in a suitcase, which was then loaded onto the plane during the Copenhagen stopover. This claim fit with the pattern of nationalist violence that had been plaguing Yugoslavia. However, as the investigation progressed, other theories emerged. Some speculated that the Yugoslav Secret Service might have been involved, targeting a specific passenger believed to be carrying sensitive documents. This theory gained traction due to the Cold War tensions of the era and Yugoslavia's complex political position between East and West. Adding to the mystery, eyewitnesses on the ground reported seeing the plane break up at a much lower altitude than official reports stated. This discrepancy fueled conspiracy theorists and raised questions about potential cover-ups. Were authorities from multiple countries colluding to hide the truth? Vesna herself in later years expressed doubts about the official narratives. She claimed that in the aftermath of the crash, she had overheard airport staff discussing a suspected bomb in a briefcase, but was later told to keep quiet about it. Despite her traumatic experience, Vesna initially expressed a desire to return to her job as a flight attendant. She loved flying and didn't want her passion to be destroyed by fear. However, Yugoslav Airlines, concerned about the publicity and potential liability, instead offered her a desk job. Vesna reluctantly accepted, but found herself struggling with the mundane nature of office work after the excitement of flying. As news of her miraculous survival spread globally, Vesna became an unwilling celebrity. She was entered into the Guinness Book of World Records for surviving the highest fall without a parachute. Journalists clamored for interviews, and her story was featured in newspapers and magazines worldwide. Vesna's survival story quickly entered the realm of medical marvel. Doctors and scientists studied her case, seeking to understand how a human body could withstand such extreme conditions. Her experience provided valuable insights into the limits of human endurance and the body's capacity to survive traumatic injuries. Interestingly, Vesna's brush with death gave her a unique perspective on life and conflict. She became an advocate for peace, often speaking out against nationalism and violence. Her message was powerful. Life is precious and fragile, and should not be wasted on hatred and conflict. As Vesna aged, she found a measure of peace with her unique place in history. While she never fully escaped the shadow of that fateful day in 1972, she learned to use her experience to inspire others and to advocate for causes she believed in. Throughout her life, Vesna never forgot the other victims of the crash. She often visited their memorials and spoke about the importance of remembering those who lost their lives. Her survival, she insisted, should not overshadow the tragedy of those who perished. On December 23, 2016, at the age of 66, Vesna Vulović passed away in her apartment in Belgrade. The news of her death sparked a renewed interest in her extraordinary story, with tributes pouring in from around the world. Media outlets across the globe reported on her passing, recounting once again the miraculous fall that had defined her life. Many noted the cruel irony that after surviving such an incredible ordeal, Vesna had ultimately succumbed to relatively ordinary causes. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people, including former colleagues, aviation experts, and ordinary citizens who had been inspired by her story. The ceremony was a mix of sorrow for her passing and celebration of her remarkable life. As news of her passing spread, many media outlets replayed interviews with Vesna from over the years. One particularly poignant clip, she reflected on the meaning of her experience. "I'm not lucky. Everybody thinks I'm lucky, but they are mistaken. If I were lucky, I would never have had this accident, and my life would be normal, like anybody else." After her death, some of Vesna's personal belongings, including her flight attendant uniform and her Guinness Book of World Records certificate, were donated to a museum. Still, many questions about Flight 367 remain unanswered. The true cause of the explosion, whether it was a bomb, a missile, or something else entirely, may never be known with certainty.